What does it take to move beyond charity and actually change systems? How do you make sure people around the world can access assistive technology that fits, lasts, and truly supports their lives? And what happens when innovation meets global responsibility? That's the conversation behind Bridging the Gap, Charles Redding on global solutions for assistive technology. And it's coming up on Disability Deep Dive.
Welcome to Disability Deep Dive. I'm Keith.
And I'm Jody. Today's episode takes us beyond borders and into a conversation about systems, sustainability, and what real access looks like on the global scale.
Our guest is Charles Redding, Executive Director of Wheels for Humanity and the leader of the Center for Logistics and Supply of Assistive Products, known as CLASP, a social enterprise focused on transforming how assistive technology reaches people in less resourced communities around the world.
Instead of relying on one-time donations, CLASP is building sustainable supply chains that connect manufacturers, rehabilitation centers, hospitals, and humanitarian responders with the right products at the right time.
In this conversation, we talk about what it means to shift systems, how CLASP operates in crisis and conflict settings, and why access to assistive technology is a global issue that deserves far more attention than it gets.
So let's get into it. Here's our conversation with Charles Redding. Hello, Mr. Redding. Welcome to Disability Deep Dive. To start, can you introduce yourself to our listeners and share a little bit about your role at Wheels for Humanity and CLASP?
Sure, and thank you for having me here. My name is Charles Redding, and I'm the Executive Director for Momentum Wheels for Humanity. We're a nonprofit organization. We're actually headquartered in the Los Angeles area, but we have offices in Ukraine, El Salvador. We've shipped our assistive technology products now to over 70 different countries. Our mission is to promote greater inclusion for people with disabilities globally. And we do that primarily through mobility, therapy, advocacy, and empowerment. And we've aligned our work into really three focus areas. The first one is strengthening rehabilitation and assistive technology services. And there we're really supporting the development of rehabilitation services within the health system. And unfortunately, in most countries, it's not a part of the health system.
Mm-hmm.
The second area, assistive technology supply provision, and that's where our social enterprise class come in, and which I know we'll talk about a little bit later. But there we're increasing global access to what we consider to be high quality, affordable assistive products. And again, unfortunately, that's not always the case, so we're really focused there. And our third and final area is what we call inclusive disaster response. And we're working to bolster resilience of people with disabilities before, during, and after disaster strikes. And unfortunately, during a time of disaster, a lot of times people with disabilities or afterthoughts are not thought of at all. And so we want to make sure we focus on the needs of those individuals during a time of disaster.
Well, that's amazing. It's a wonderful organization. Really admire everything that you guys are doing. But you mentioned CLASP and said, we're gonna dig into that a little bit deeper here. So for those who may not be familiar with it, what is CLASP? And how does it address the global challenge of getting high quality, appropriate assistive technology to the people that need it the most?
Sure. So first of all, CLASP is an acronym. People love acronyms. And what it stands for is Consolidating Logistics for Assistive Technologies for Supplier Provision, right? So implied in there is a lot of, it's a mechanism.
It's a mouthful too.
It's a mouthful, which is why we say
Right.
CLASP. And we actually launched CLASP 10 years. We're celebrating 10 years now.
Oh.
And at the time, it was very groundbreaking initiative that aimed to improve access to a diverse range of high quality, affordable wheelchairs in low and middle income countries. Now, since then, we've expanded it to include a number of AT products and mobility aids. And it's a hub. So we've developed a hub or warehouse that's located in Shanghai, China. And there we're stocking a variety of adult and pediatric wheelchairs, posterior products, walking aids, cushions, park kits, you name it. And we're really providing a service to a lot of the manufacturers of AT, right? So we come in and provide that logistics support, that distribution, a lot of the marketing, a lot of the networking within that industry for them, so they don't have to do it.
Wow. That's a clear picture of the solutions that CLASP offers. Wheels for Humanity and CLASP have spoken about the limitations of one-off donations of mobility devices. What are some of the common issues that with that model, and how does CLASP's approach create long-term sustainable change?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned, CLASP offers a diverse range of these products. We make sure they're affordable and they're properly fitted. Unfortunately, there's a number of key barriers to access for AT, particularly low and middle income countries. Number one is unreliable supply. So, to your point, many governments in low and middle income countries rely on donations. And I'm sure these donations have good intentions, but there are unintended consequences as well. They can often lead to inconsistent supply, inappropriate products, and inefficient distribution, and unfortunately, inequitable access. So those are all not good. So CLASP, we work to address that. The second one is cost. These products aren't cheap.
Sure.
High cost, limited choices. So available products are often either prohibitively expensive or low quality that can be safely adapted to the user. So we make sure our products are high quality, they're appropriate for the community in which we're serving. And we provide a service in terms of making sure they're properly fitted, right? So a wheelchair is not a one size fit all. We make sure we go in and provide that. And the third one, which we find quite a bit, is just a lack of trained providers. Unfortunately, healthcare providers are not widely trained on proper wheelchair provision and have limited exposure, right, to a range of products that meet the different needs of the user. So even if they knew what to provide, they don't have access to it. So these are really three. So we talk about unreliable supply, high cost, lack of trained preferred class. This is where we come in. This is where we see we can come in and provide that service to make sure we're offering a diverse range of these products that they can choose from. We become a one-stop shop for them, if you will, in which they can, order a 40-foot container full of assistive technology and the diversity that they need, and making sure it's properly fitted and adapted to that community in which we're trying to serve.
Wow.
It's incredible. It sounds like you're taking a logistics nightmare for the most part, and figuring out how to make it work. And so, CLASP is operating as a bridge, I guess, between manufacturers and those service providers. Can you walk us through how that supply chain works in practice? And you've already hinted at this, but why it's really such a game changer for global AT access?
No, sure. I mean, when we talk about supply chain, we often talk about planning, sourcing, making, and delivery or distributing products. And so those are all elements that have to be considered within a supply chain. And unfortunately, a lot of the small manufacturers, they can't handle that entire piece. So as I mentioned, back in 2015 or roughly 10 years ago, we established this AT Hub in Shanghai, free trade zone. And the reason we put it there, it's a central location for international shipping. And it's also in close proximity to the product manufacturer. So you can see we have a hub there. We brought the manufacturing together with the shipping and distribution to provide that service. And so this hub provides a solution to many of those supply side challenges that I talked about that are faced by the wheelchair service providers in what we consider to be less resource settings, such as limited product variety. It could be excessive lead time, and it could be other logistical burdens in which they're just not, capable of managing. So we provide that for them. And most often with manufacturers, they may provide one, maybe two product types, while the need in the community is much more diverse than that. So what they really need is an array of these type of products to choose from. So we've developed this relationship with a number of these AT manufacturers that can address the variety of the needs. So we have a direct relationship with them, and we're able to procure our products directly from them and put it in the warehouse and work on a more holistic approach to providing these to communities that need it. So this mechanism that we provide, we can procure and warehouse all of these products. We can also provide provisioning. By that, I mean we can go out and provide the service to make sure they're properly fitted. And then lastly, we can distribute the products. We have also a relationship with a lot of the shippers, freight forwarders that we coordinate with. So for manufacturer, all they need to do is say, hey, CLASP, here are my products. We procure those products, and then we take it from there and report back. So it's really a win-win proposition, both for the manufacturers, for the recipients of the products, and also for us in terms of providing that service.
Wow.
Wow. That's a fascinating look behind the scenes
It
of
really
that.
is.
I'm going to go too detailed into supply chain. I'm an old supply chain person, but it really can be complicated and daunting
Yeah.
to
Oh,
a
I bet.
manufacturer that
I
have to
bet.
navigate, that field.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's taken a lot of
Fantastic.
time to build it to where it is today. It didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So CLASP has provided support in places like Myanmar and Gaza. What are the unique challenges that come with delivering assistive technology to humanitarian or crisis settings? And how does CLASP adapt to meet those needs?
Yeah, I hinted at this before. One of our pillars is inclusive disaster relief, and all too often during a time of crisis, people with disabilities are not considered. So the timely delivered products to address their needs is paramount. It can really be, mean the difference between life and death,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And so one of our focus is that inclusive disaster. And again, what we're doing there, we've established partnerships with UN Ops AT Scale, World Health Organization, where we've developed, kits. So we actually are pre-positioning kits of AT products, and there's some incontinence products there as well, but to address the needs of people with disabilities during this process. So you can imagine, we've got warehouse now, we've got these kits which list all the items that are typically needed from wheelchairs, mobility aids, walkers, crushers, you name it, incontinence items. And so they're sitting there ready to go. And so when we get the alert that there's been a disaster like in Myanmar, like in Gaza, that there's a need for these products, we can quickly ship and make sure those products that get there and they're appropriate for that community again that is offered, let out. So it just allows us to respond quickly in a more thoughtful and more targeted way in time of crisis.
Wow.
Well, are there challenges? I mean, as far as like getting things past like checkpoints, military issues, things like that. I mean, like,
Yeah, and
what
should have
barriers do
mentioned
you
that.
face?
These are usually guarded to war zones or disaster zones, which is very difficult. So a lot of our issues are really around logistics again. Sometimes it's just, if the airport is just port of entry, how do we get the products in? And so that's if a lot of times you're airship, but if we have to, train a man, we may have to ship a man via sea. So the mode of transportation becomes a critical element for us. And then there's, in the case of Gaza, we actually had the warehouse, which was destroyed, where they were going to store the product. So just proper storage of the components once they get there. And then on the ground distribution. So what we do is we typically are working with another agency, like UNICEF or some others that may have on the ground people. So we deliver the products to them, and then they're able to distribute the products on the ground. So that's how we navigate those challenges.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
That makes a lot of sense. Wow, amazing. Well, beyond delivering products, Wheels for Humanity and CLASP are part of a larger push for systemic change in rehabilitation and assistive technology access. What role do you see policy, advocacy, and local capacity building playing into that vision?
Yeah, I really believe policy advocacy and local capacity building, they're all critical to strengthening the overall health system and ensure long-term, sustainability. You may be aware, as many as 70 million people around the world need a wheelchair for mobility, but don't have access.
Yeah.
Wow.
That makes no sense to me. And globally, as many as 2.4 billion people, or 1 in 4, have conditions that could benefit, for some form of physical rehabilitation. And that need for rehabilitation is only going to grow. It's largely unmet.
Yeah.
In some low middle income countries, more than 50% of the people don't have access to rehabilitation services. So again, that global need is expected to continue to rise. We've got all the conflicts, we've got wars, we've got all other things that are happening. So our approach is to really to focus on integrating rehabilitation and AT services into all levels of healthcare. All right, and again, in a lot of communities, it's not considered healthcare, so it's over to the side, and we're trying to integrate it, make sure it is, so that budgeting and decision making can be a part of that. We're also advocating for greater investments into AT and rehabilitation service. So a lot of times we'll go in and work on a investment framework, help them develop an investment framework for AT for that community, and then training. We mentioned capacity building. We focus on training rehabilitation professionals and improving education or clinical outcomes for the program. So a lot of times we may be partnered with our university at the curriculum levels We go in and train the trainers. So we have a number of on-call consultants that we use that are physical therapists, occupational therapists that can go in and provide these services. And lastly, we're just always and continuously trying to raise awareness about the importance of rehabilitation and AT service. So, the work is holistic. It has to be done not just in providing the products, but it has to be developing political will, shaping policies, advocating, capacity building, making sure there's enough trained professionals, there. So all those, that's why I say I think they all are critical. And that's the work. You just summarized, that's the work that we're trying to do. And I think here, often in the US, we take for granted that these things are just happening, but a lot of communities are not.
Sure.
Unfortunately, they're not.
Yeah. That broader vision really highlights that it's about long-term change as well as what you can do in the moment. As you look to the future, what are the next steps for CLASP? Are there new products, new partnerships, or regions that you guys are particularly focusing on?
Yeah, hopefully all of the above. I mentioned previously CLASP, it's been around 10 years now. It was actually started as a program funded by USA, USAID, and that's how it started. And obviously, we don't have any more funding from them. So our next step is to just continue to transition to what we call a social enterprise, that we can generate sustainable income while meeting the needs of the lower and middle income countries that we can serve. So we're doing some things to fine tune our model to make sure at the same time we're doing well, we're doing good. We can continue to generate income. We can put back into that model and do more work. We do envision expanding. Right now, our focus has been on mobility. A lot of requests we're getting is beyond mobility, so we're thinking eventually out of the hearing to vision aids as well. So if we're responding, for example, to a tender that want AT technology, we can bring all of that. We can not just mobility. And now we may not directly do it, but we're going to make sure we have a list of manufacturers or others, partners that we can bring in to provide all three of those. Again, trying to give more of a holistic service provision to people with disabilities beyond just the mobility.
Wow.
That's incredible. Yeah, that makes sense. That sounds like a logical next step as far as expansion goes. And that's amazing. Well, this has been so interesting. Before we wrap up, we always ask our guests to share a quote deep cut. So like that's a book or a film. It could be a TV show. It could be a song that's been on your mind or that connects in some way to your work. What would you pick? What would be your deep cut?
Yeah, and I'm not sure how deep it is, but I keep coming back to where I consider it being an oldie but goodie, and people ask me all the time. I just think the book, here's a book, or maybe you've probably heard of it, Start with the Why by Simon Sinek. It's just it's just a fascinating book. I mean, it's not new, and it's something I kind of patterned my career off of, and I think particularly for nonprofits could benefit from that, and we're trying to do that certainly with our work at Momentum. And it is really, starting with the why, looking at, the why and the what and the how. And I see this a lot. A lot of people want to talk about how they do things or, what it is they're doing. Yeah. And then when I ask the question, well, why are you doing it? It's not as clear. And so, previously I used to give talks on, shifting organizations from outputs to outcomes, right? So a lot of organizations like to talk about the outputs. How many of these we did, how many of that, and what outcomes though that you have. Why are you really answering the question as to why? Why do you exist? And are you really staying true to that? So I think that can lead to, personal mission statements, organizational missions, and making sure you stay focused. Yeah, I would just highly recommend that to anyone, particularly leaders. Just start with the why. And I think that'll bring so much clarity into the work you're trying to do, the people you're trying to hire, the mission you're developing. If we would just start with the why and not, figure out how to do something and then figure out what you want to do. And then lastly, why am I? And then be left later ask your question, well, why am I doing this? And,
Yeah.
and a lot of times you find you're doing the wrong thing. So that's what I look. Now, again, I don't know how deep it is, but it's certainly something that continues to resonate with me, and I'm just going to share with as many people as I can.
I think that's great.
I
It's
love
a great
it. No, beautiful. Yeah. Relevant, very relevant.
One last thing before we go. Is there any question that we may have missed about Wheels for Humanity, or anything you want to say about Wheels for Humanity that we haven't discussed so far?
I think we hit on it. I mean, I didn't go into great depth, this notion of a social enterprise. Again, this class, we've kind of carved it out as a, sort of its own business entity. That we are really, we're trying to generate income, but we're putting it back in there to do more good. So although it's part of that nonprofit structure, the products, these wheelchairs that I talk about, these are not donated products. These are sourced. We're procuring them. So, we're procuring these, and we mark them up slightly, and, to keep them affordable, and then make sure we are investing that back into that entity and providing more services over there. So that's just something, that's CLASP. I want to make sure that model resonates, and it's really just providing such a need out there. I just want to make sure that came through.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation.
Yeah, it's just fun.
Grateful.
I enjoyed it.
We're grateful for the work that you do, and Wheels for Humanity and CLASP does as well.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.
Stick around. This week's Deep Cut is on the way.
Today, we're diving into a documentary that challenges how the world understands disability, sport, and power. Rising Phoenix tells the story of the Paralympic Games through the voices of disabled athletes themselves, tracing its roots from post-war rehabilitation to a global movement. Rather than framing disability as limitation, the film asks a bigger question. What happens when disabled people are centered as leaders, competitors, and agents of change?
That's right. Rising Phoenix puts disabled athletes in control of their own stories rather than filtering them through commentary or pity. How did that shift in storytelling impact the way you experienced the film?
Yeah, I thought it was, I loved the focus on, the athletes seeing disability as a power. I think one of them even mentioned, like, it's a superpower, and you have to see it that way and focus on what makes that disability your superpower. And for a lot of people, it's sport. And I think that's really, really cool. I love that they sort of all talked about that in some way. They might not have used the same terminology, but it seemed that everyone that really they focused on a good bit in the documentary. It was clear that their disability is what gave them their unique ability to compete and helped enforce their identity, not something that they shied away from or felt was a limitation. It was really the opposite. And it was great. It was refreshing and cool without being, sappy or silly. Like it was well told.
Yeah, I like that. It was inspirational, of course, but it wasn't in the sappy trope way. It was, this empowering way. And I really appreciated that. A lot of people talk about, what kind of person would I be if I didn't have my disability? What would my personality be like? What would my body be like? What would my life be like? And, they, kind of go over that a little bit of how their disability shaped their life and brought them to where they are today. It's really, really interesting.
It really was. And each one had their own unique story. Each one had their own unique, even if their physical disabilities were similar in certain aspects, everyone had a very unique story. They did a great job on the diversity of the casting, in my opinion. People from countries all over the world, number one, but different disabilities, different backgrounds, different stories, things that were, from, just the issue at birth, congenital disability versus real tragedies that happened to some people. It was, they did a really good job putting together the cast and stories behind everything. It was very well done.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, the film also traces the origins of the Paralympics back to like rehabilitation, like physical rehab that was being done after World War II. Why is that history important for understanding disability rights and representation today?
Well, disability history is important to disability rights because, disability rights aren't this big abstract idea. They started with people, wanting access, wanting equity, and, just trying to survive in the world. You know, Many people, after World War II, before World War II, and sometimes even today, are seen through this medical lens, as opposed to, as human beings. There are problems that need to be managed. They need to be just hidden away and not seen. And so I think, the doctor that they talk about in the documentary, he felt that disabled people had dignity, or deserved dignity, had dignity, and he used competitive sports as a way to give them that, as well as rehabilitate them. Some of the people he was working with were soldiers coming back from World War II.
Right.
And instead of just letting them lie there in a bed, it was about rehabilitation and giving them that dignity in their life, because people can recover sometimes physically. And he was pushing back against the idea that, having a disability meant you couldn't have any type of meaningful life. And I think that was a big shift in that society in that time period. And I just really had no idea, his take on it and his contribution to disability rights. And it was just an interesting, way for them to show the history and the history of the Paralympics.
Yeah, indeed. I had no idea. It was all new information to me how the Paralympics started. I had no clue that it would trace back to rehab post World War II in England and be like so progressive. I mean, you think of the mid to late 40s, like so progressive. I mean, it was explained how really even during the war and certainly before World War II, a lot of soldiers who would end up having injuries that would maybe cause them to have paraplegia or something like that, often would just kind of lie and, for lack of better putting it, just kind of rot, like they were just left. And so many would die within about 6 months of their injury, and not so much because of the injury, but more because of the lack of care and just being ignored, essentially. And this doctor, again, so ahead of his time, realized that that's silly. There were plenty of things. I mean, he even started the idea of moving people around, like rotating people every couple hours so they didn't get bed sores. Like, I'm in my head, I'm like, they didn't even do that? Like that? That's amazing. Like, I think of that as just like, that required discovery. Like, to me, that's just like, you move people around so they don't get, sores or whatever,
Yeah.
To me, it's right. Nowadays, we just think of that as just a normal thing. And it was, so even starting with just that, but then realizing that, like, you could then add the element of sport and things like that. And everyone sort of found their unique niche. And it was such an incredible and inspirational story. I was amazed by the history, and that alone makes this worthwhile watching. I mean, it's worth for so many other reasons, but that alone, if you just didn't know anything about the history of it, you should watch it.
Yeah. He died in 1980, and they had his daughter did interviews with his daughter. And there was one line in there where she was talking about how he was never home because he was doing the work. He didn't just tell people, we need to do this. He was actually hands-on doing the work.
Turning the patients, like, avoid bed stuff. Yeah, he was the one doing it.
And she didn't have this bitterness about her dad not being home. She knew, even as a child, that the work that he was doing was so very important. Yeah. And she was just, you could just see the pride in her for, what her father did. So I like that a lot. It's very
so
touching.
True. Yeah, I agree.
So we talked about this a little bit, but the athletes in Rising Phoenix come from different countries and backgrounds, but many share the experience of exclusion and underfunding. The film also shows how, from the early days of the Paralympics to today, disabled people have been viewed very differently around the world. One moment that stuck with me was learning that in 1980, the Soviet Union chose not to host the Paralympics at all because they mentioned there, and it was stated that there's no disabled people in that country.
Propaganda at its best.
Right?
Yeah.
So what does that moment and other moments like that reveal about how attitudes towards disability have shaped, access, visibility, and opportunities for disabled people globally?
Well, even if you just frame it in the lens of, we just talked about how progressive in the 1940s this was for someone to, even see people who had been injured and leading to a disability, to give them the dignity they deserved and help them find their identity and so on, to 40 years later, post, lots of civil rights movements around the world and so on. And we've still got a country that says we don't have disabled people because obviously they look upon people with disabilities as not equal or lower class, or they wouldn't say such a thing. Right. So, because it's obviously a lie. I mean, it's just, disability is part of the life, the human condition in life around the world. So it's just a deeply absurd statement, but it's kind of fascinating that as many things change, so many things stay the same.
Yeah. And there was the one athlete who was born in St. Petersburg in the 80s. And she talked about what it was like. Her mother could not afford her treatments. She went immediately into an orphanage and then was adopted out. Yes. So, that's one example of many, many, many of, the Soviet Union did have disabled people, and, they've grown with the times and come around with that. But I had no idea. That was just when I, heard that part, I was like, you've got to be kidding. That's no way.
Yeah. Same. I had no idea about that. It's, and then too, we can also look at the fact that, so Rio de Janeiro, part of the story is focused on the 2016 Olympics that it ended up, they kind of go back to talking about 2012 and how it was such a success. London was hosting the Paralympics. It was huge. And now it's going to, they pick Rio de Janeiro as the host city for 2016. And, huge. Everyone's excited. Well, then as it got closer, it started becoming more clear that, I don't want to say the country of Brazil or this, I don't know where it lies, but somewhere in the planning and work being done to host the Olympics and Paralympics, supposedly, it looked like the Paralympics were giving like short shrift. They were not being considered as important, and in fact was highly at risk of not even being held. So that was, again, it's another. Like it's part of the package, right? Like the Olympics and the Paralympics. This is what happens. It's hosted, in the same city for the most part. There've been exceptions, across the world, every 2 years now, really, with the winter and summer. And it, in a way, it should just be a given that that's what happens. And as late as 2016, we're seeing, a country that's kind of like seeing it again as, it's a second-class set of games. It's not as important.
Yeah, this optional thing.
Yeah, we don't really have to have it. We'll just, use the money to make the quote regular Olympics better. Yeah. And so that's another example, I think, of this kind of global, disparity of how they see things. Yeah. Well, sport in the film isn't just about competition. It's also about systems. So how does Rising Phoenix connect athletic achievement to broader issues of access, policy, and social change?
I think it shows that sport is never just about what happens on the field or in the arena. Yes, it's about the personal talent of the athlete, but it's also about, the systems that are around them. Do they have funding? Do they have access to coaching? The policies in their country? And the public attitude, like we were talking about people with disabilities. What stood out to me is about the early systems, how they can start shaping opportunities for people. During the Obama era, we were still talking about whether students who are disabled have equal rights to participate in high school sports. That wasn't that long ago. It shows that, representation and access are tied together. And if young athletes don't see themselves represented, especially in sports, it affects, how they grow up believing where they belong. Do they belong in competitive spaces? Do they belong in leadership roles? Do they belong in public life at all? They can feel that way. And I think it connects those early barriers to the bigger picture that, when disabled athletes are visible, when they're supported, when they're celebrated, it doesn't just change sporting events. It can change culture, and it changes, assumptions, and pushes systems to adapt, not for us to adapt to those systems. So, I think it's just really important. Representation is really important. And we say that in a lot of things. And I think, it has to start early, especially with sports. People have to years and years of training to get to that elite level. So it has to start early.
Yeah, agreed. And, sport is a platform for this. I think, again, it's so invaluable and something that, I don't want people to think of as, just every, 4 years we have, the Summer Paralympics and then another, the Winter Paralympics. Like, it's not, this doesn't just happen, every few years. This is, sport is important to a lot of people around the world. And for people with disabilities, it can be just as important. And it's performed and celebrated all the time. And I think people sometimes don't see that. And a documentary like this really does help show how important sport can be. And again, like we mentioned earlier, it helps define identity. It helps show strengths. It helps, build confidence, and all those things are important for making someone even just a better self-advocate, a better representative for themselves. And I think anything that's done to sort of hinder that, such as not allowing people with disabilities to compete in different types of sports, whether that's playground sports, high school sports, whatever, is such a detrimental thing, because again, it's a indication that someone thinks that you are less than, and that's just, it's not fair. It's just as, I mean, there's so many systems out there, so many areas where people think, well, people with disabilities don't do that. They don't have families. They don't get married. They don't do this and that. It's all ridiculous. And this is just another area. Like, oh, they can't play sports. Well, hell yeah, they can. I mean, have you seen the Paralympics and the Special Olympics and things like that? I mean, So it's just absurd. It's just absurd when that happens.
I was also thinking about, they were talking about, it's every 4 years, based on whether you do summer and winter. There's some athletes that do both. But one of the ladies was talking about, I have all this training to do in the next 4 years. This may be my only chance to participate, because who knows what's going to happen to my body in the next 4 years, So not only are they doing all this training and all this work, but they're also living in the world as a disabled person, and that has its own challenges separate from all of that. So what a hurdle to try to overcome, in the 4 years between the Paralympics. So that was, kind of thought-provoking to me.
Yes, indeed.
So one of the strongest messages in Rising Phoenix is the rejection of narrow ideas about strength and success. How does the film redefine what those concepts look like through disabled athletes?
Yeah. I mean, we kind of touched on this, already, but, the idea that strength is really more about resilience and adaptability and, even an aspect of, community building, I think is a part of it.
Yeah.
But it's, strength and success. I mean, the people they talk to, the athletes, and I think anyone that would compete at that level in the Paralympics, whether they were in this documentary or not, I mean, the point is to overcome. I mean, for athletes of any type, whether disabled or not, you're overcoming a limitation. Like, until you train and work out and build muscle and get better and better, you're not going to you don't just wake up and you're an Olympic athlete.
Yeah.
Anyone, and on any single person on this planet. And so it always involves training and overcoming, those things are not easy for anyone. So there's always something to overcome. When you're talking about an athlete with a disability, I think you can think of it both the same way and different. Okay. Maybe you could say, okay, well, there's something additional that needs to be overcome. But I think in a way that's almost a limiting way to look. I mean, again, we all have to overcome something. So, and we're all different. And so this is just a different thing. What you need to overcome versus what I would need to overcome are just two different things.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter. So to me, that idea of, the whole overcoming specifically about, oh, they have a disability, they overcame, such and such to do that. No, you point back to that same person and say, well, and everything for you in life was just a breeze. Like you didn't have to ever overcome anything. You never had to fight hard for something or work hard to achieve something that you weren't just given. That's life. And so, maybe start looking at things that way versus focusing on, disability as some extra unique, thing that needs to be overcome.
Yeah. And that, they talk about them being elite athletes, that, their excellence is based on their own terms. One of the people in the athletes in the documentary stated, you go to the Olympics and most of the bodies, look the same. You're trying to fit this to, and you go to the Paralympics and all the bodies competing, one sport are so different. And it's what a celebration of how different the human beings are. And they're all, at the elite level of their bodies. And I like that. I appreciate that. It's, what is excellent for me in my body is different for someone else. I just thought that was really a good point that you had made.
Yeah, I love that. That again, excellence and strength in diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Well, by the end of the documentary, the Paralympics are framed as a global movement, not just a sporting event. What do you think the film is ultimately asking viewers to reconsider about disability in society?
I think it's asking us to reconsider disability as something far bigger than just one individual's experience. A disability can shape based on the culture, based on political identity, shaped by history, policy, not only by, the body or the impairments.
Right.
And you had mentioned this earlier about, the Rio Paralympics possibly not happening. Even at a global event of that scale, disabled athletes were treated as something, optional. That's something that, it can be cut. If we have, don't have enough money, it's not that big a deal. But the documentary really stressed and drove home the point that these athletes are elite in what they're doing. And recognition for them needs to come from institutions. It needs to come from media. It needs to come from the audience showing up and buying tickets. They mentioned several times where, they didn't even sell tickets or, people didn't even know it was happening. So the stands were almost empty. So the gap there is not about the ability of the athletes. It's about their visibility and, where we see their intrinsic value.
Yes.
And so, the film kind of puts that back out on the viewers and the media and the systems. Are we reinforcing old hierarchies and old ways of thinking, or are we building something that's inclusive? It's not just about cheering that, they're crossing over the finish line. It's about supporting access and providing just as much television coverage and support as other athletes get.
Yeah, for sure. And taking what you're saying a little step further with the lack of ticket sales, for example, in Rio, yeah, they hadn't sold tickets. Then when they did, they filled up the place.
Yeah.
You know,
People wanted to
everyone
see
was
it.
excited. They wanted to see it. And people were just cheering and they're so excited. And I forget which athlete said it, but one of them said it was, you know, that the people were there not so much about disability, but they were cheering because it was an amazing sporting event.
Right.
It was amazing competition. And it was awesome to watch and exciting, no different than, you know, this
Anything
Olympic
else?
Games, anything else. Just, you know, it was just good sports.
Yeah.
And people loved it. And that's what really mattered. And so, yeah, it you know, I'm of course it's, you know, the happy ending is that it happened. They did get it. They got it going. And even though it had a bit of a slow start, they got the ticket sales out there, and then it was huge. And they kind of showed, London showed that too. And I think I forgot the previous location, but both of those were very, very, very successful Paralympics. And it was just clear how huge it could be. And when Rio gave it like such, you know, like a lower class, you know, oh, it's not as important, or this is optional, it won't matter. You know, it was. I can imagine how devastating that would be for anyone competing, and anyone who's interested, and anyone who's a fan, but especially those athletes that train so hard. And of course, a few of them mentioned, like, you know, oh my gosh, we didn't even know if we were going to be there, and it was, you know, it was so awful. So, in the end, you know, there was great competition. The fans loved it, and the disability aspect, it's not even really. It doesn't matter.
No.
It doesn't matter.
No.
You know. So.
And I don't think a lot of people realize that Olympic athletes and Paralympic athletes paid to go there. That, you know, there is they get sponsors and stuff, but it's, you know, the Olympics don't pay to bring them out there.
No.
So for them to be waiting for, you know, the Olympics were actually happening before they even made the decision about the Paralympics, whether they were happening or not. You know, they've, you know, made reservations to where they're going. They've got their tickets, they've got, you know, whatever, and it's still in the balance. You know, what stress right before you're supposed to compete, you know, this undue additional stress.
That makes the competition even harder, because you're not even focused on the training as much. You're focused on, you worry too much about if you're even going, and that's just it's just sad. Thankfully it all worked out in the end for them, but you know, this could happen again in the future. We don't, you know, we don't know. Who knows what's going to happen next?
Yeah, you feel really, really secure in knowing that the Olympics are going off, but it's unfortunate that it's kind of always, you know, is it happening? Is it not happening? So
Exactly.
Well, Rising Phoenix reminds us that disability history, culture, and leadership deserve the spotlight. It's not just a sports documentary. It's a call to rethink who we listen to and who we elevate.
Yeah, for sure. If you haven't watched it yet, Rising Phoenix is streaming now. We'll link more information in the show notes. And if you have seen it, we'd love to hear how it shaped your perspective. Thanks for joining us for this week's Deep Cut, and we'll keep digging deeper and keep disability at the center of the conversation. That's a wrap on today's episode. A huge thank you to Charles Redding for joining us and for sharing the work behind CLASP and Wheels for Humanity.
This conversation really reminds us that access isn't just about products. It's about systems, sustainability, and making sure people everywhere have what they need to live their lives fully.
We'll include links in the show notes so you can learn more about CLASP and the work Wheels for Humanity is doing around the world.
Thank you, as always, for listening and being part of this community. We'll see you next time on Disability Deep Dive. Disability Deep Dive is a podcast that is brought to you by Disability Rights Florida, where real conversations about life, culture, and ideas meet the lived disability experience. Follow us on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us at disabilityrightsflorida.org/podcast.